Right now. Good evening, everybody. Recording started. All right, John, can you hand over? Because what I'd like to do is, John is, of course, a very highly qualified and very experienced tour leader. He's taken a lot of tours to Israel, where he explains the actual living land where Jesus spent a lot of the time. And the important thing I found out about it from last week was to be able to identify a biblical passage with a location makes the Bible that much more important and that much more alive. So, John, over to you, and please introduce your topic for tonight. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Pastor Greg, and welcome to be with you again. For me, it's 4 a.m. here in the States. I live in the state of Pennsylvania. And for you, it's, of course, 7 p.m. So I'm 15 hours behind you. And yet I'm just so happy and delighted and really honored to be here sharing another session with you. Our topic tonight will be archaeology in the Bible. And as you can see, the different images on the screen, from a drone picture of Beit Shan to, on the left bottom corner, the high place of a false worship center of Arad, biblical city in the Negev, to different coins. We are going to try to do our best to connect what we have found archaeologically with the Bible. And of course, that's how we bring the Bible to life. So we're going to proceed tonight, actually, with a number of topics, and I'll share my screen here as to what archaeology is not. You may have seen before the movie Indiana Jones, and there he is, Indiana Jones. Of course, I think there's 3, or maybe a 4th one is now coming out this year. But what archaeology is not, as we begin our session tonight, it's not looking for the Ark of the Covenant, although that's a very interesting topic too. We could spend a whole session on just discussing where the Ark of the Covenant is. There's like 5 or 6 possibilities. Some are, of course, more legitimate than others, but no, archaeology is not looking for glamorous things. And of course, if you remember the movie Indiana Jones, as adventurous as he was, as maybe as daring as he was in his archaeological research, he didn't really like any snakes. So that's almost a comical way to begin. But what I want to do is, again, match the biblical record and talk about what archaeology is. And this simply, the definition comes from a Greek word that means the study of what is ancient. Now, that's not too rocket science, but it really defines what archaeology is. So as we began last session, and again, I thank Greg for the invitation to share a topic called physical settings of the Bible. We did talk about archaeology being something that does not need to prove the Bible, but it simply confirms and reveals the historicity of the Bible. So this is a big distinction between how we use archaeology as a tool in terms of digging into the dirt. And that's what I have had the chance to do. I've excavated at 7 sites now, biblical sites, and you never know what you're going to find. But even more than that, even more than the adventure of it, when we dig in the dirt, we are revealing the Bible's historicity. The Bible can stand on its own. So I want you to know from the start that that's my position. Archaeology does not need to prove the Bible, but it simply confirms and reveals its historicity. Now, when we talk about an archaeological site, and we again did this last week, so I won't be redundant tonight, but an archaeological tell, T-E-L, it's actually an Arabic word that means ancient mound. We often find biblical sites, especially in Israel. Close to 200 sites have been either excavated or surveyed, but we typically find an archaeological site that begins with maybe its presence on a hill, and then one layer upon another, it builds, it gets higher and higher. In fact, we talked about the law of stratigraphy, and this is what we typically use in order to study the one layer upon another, upon another, upon another. So here in this illustration, we have a good sense of biblical sites, their early formation, and then after one level has been destroyed or not occupied, then another level comes on and builds on top of it. Now, I'm going to use a picture of a cake that my daughter made. Actually, in the West Coast, when she lived in the state of Washington, blackberries are abundant. So when she took this cake out of the refrigerator, I'm thinking, in a way, this looks like an archaeological tell. So when she cut it, anyone getting hungry yet, by the way, she cut it and I go, yes, that's an archaeological tell. Some of the layers, as you see, this layer here, it's an icing level and another icing level, and then there's some blackberries in between. This is sort of how an archaeological site develops. However, it's maybe more like a piece of lasagna in terms of an archaeological site, but we have one layer, and then this layer either gets destroyed or unoccupied, and then another layer comes on top, and another layer, and another, and you get the idea that soon we have an archaeological site developing over literally thousands of years. Some archaeological sites have over 24 levels of occupation that span, for instance, at Megiddo, 2,500 years. So when we talk about the rule of stratigraphy, the lower that you find the ruins, like bones or a stone wall here, the earlier its date. And that makes sense because as different people groups come and occupy higher levels, like this skull or this ash level or this stone idol, we have one layer upon another. And this is what we do as archaeologists. We dig down through these layers of stratigraphy. And we, of course, we come across the later levels before we dig down to find the early levels. So in this session, and I'm going to, again, try to keep it to about 50 minutes. We're going to then offer some Q&A at the end if you have any specific questions. So I'll be watching my clock here closely, but what I did here in this session is I have organized it with 3 sample archaeological sites in more detail. This will be Jericho, Lachish, and Qumran. Then we're going to take you to one archaeological dig. I think it's always important to inform our audience to the fact of how an archaeological dig works. In fact, you see this picture here to the right. This is actually from the final season at this site called Biblical Gath or Tel Asafi. They just found this massive 9th century wall as this last season has come to a conclusion, but you can see how we dig and reveal walls and gates and other things like that. And then finally, our last section, our section of this seminar will be to talk about the significant other archaeological discoveries that confirm and connect us to the Bible. Our objective, again, is to link archaeology with the Bible. So we're going to begin with the site of Jericho. Now, you can see that on the picture from this drone image, it's not a very large city. Most of us, however, know of the story of Jericho. You know, the walls came tumbling down. Joshua 6 is where we find the story recorded. It's about a 9 acre site, not very big. Sometimes people say 11, but part of the archaeological tell has been cut away by this road about 100 years ago. But we're going to pay attention to the walls that you see at the southern end. Now, this site has been excavated many times, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. So let me try to, again, play a drone video so that you could see different aspects of not only the modern city of Jericho today, but also what it looks like archaeologically. Now, by the way, this resource is available on our website, a download version of what we call Biblical Israel by Air. It's an hour and 6 minute video with 55 biblical sites. You may be interested in downloading that from our resource page. But modern Jericho is a large Palestinian Arab city. In fact, we're looking across to where the Jordan River was. So those hills on the other side of the Jordan River are the country of Jordan. But to the west of the site, we have the traditional location of where Jesus was tempted, although that's just a traditional location called Jebel Gur Entel, the mountain of the 40. But in between the modern city and the cliffs of the Judean desert is this site of Jericho. Now we're going to focus on the walls on the south end of the site in just a moment. The site is deemed to be the oldest city in Israel because of this tower here. Now there's a debate in terms of how old that tower is, but again, our focus is on this wall and this wall, especially the outer wall that we're flying over now, and then exposing the inner wall. We want to find out what the city of Jericho looked like when Joshua was here. Here's the outer wall, and notice that it's a stone wall. There it is. It's a stone wall, and it's not that particular section of wall that fell when the Israelites surrounded the city 7 times. If you recall the story, they blew their shofars or ram horn, and then the walls came tumbling down. So keep this story in mind as we talk about the archaeology of the site. Now, in Joshua 3 and 4, already after the 2 spies were sent to search out the city, they cross on dry ground. The Ark of the Covenant, incidentally, we talked about Indiana Jones already, but the Ark of the Covenant goes ahead, and then once the Israelites cross the Jordan River, they probably saw a city that looked similar to this. Now, I have to say that not every archaeologist believed it was a double-walled city with houses in between the outer wall and the inner wall. Now, there's an ongoing debate about that, but we can appreciate the history of the site being excavated, first of all, by the Germans. In fact, look at this wall right there. This is the first time that this outer wall was exposed by the Germans with all kinds of residential structures inside. Now, we now know, as we reevaluate the archaeology of these houses, they don't date to the same time as the wall does. So we really can't say definitively that there were house structures right inside this wall. That's not a very important point, but here comes a British archaeologist named John Garstang. As you see, he dug here in the 30s, and he revealed more of what he called City 4. In fact, this was the time when the Bible was not questioned at all in terms of its historicity. And John Garstang said, in a word, in all material details and in date, the fall of Jericho took place as described in the biblical narrative. The link with Joshua and the Israelites is only circumstantial, but it seems to be solid and without a flaw. So the walls that he continued to find, these walls, look how massive this stone wall is. He found evidence of the city being destroyed. He also, by the way, is the one who exposed this big, large tower. We're not really sure what purpose it served, but look at the picture on the left. Big grain storage jars filled with burned grain. And this is significant because as we read in Joshua 6, Joshua, of the 31 cities that he took, and by the way, here are some scarabs of Egyptians like Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, and Amenhotep III. Garstang found a lot of, believe it or not, Egyptian presence here at Jericho as well. But what Garstang really confirmed is that this city was destroyed by fire, and that's exactly what the text of Joshua 6 tells us. In fact, only 3 of the 31 cities were apparently put to fire. So here comes Catherine Kenyon, another British archaeologist in the 50s. And she too found more segments of the stone wall. She found a lot of mud brick wall and other interesting details. However, what Kenyon concluded really rocked the biblical scholarship world. She too found big storage jars filled with grain that was burned. So it links well with the story of Jericho being destroyed by fire. However, the leading question is this stone wall that we see at the southern end. What date should we attribute this wall? What's the date of the wall's destruction is a more specific question. So Kenyon, just without too much detail other than this, she dated this wall to what we call the Middle Bronze period, or a time period about 150 years prior to when the Bible suggests that Joshua was here. She said the city was destroyed, but there was no city at the time that Joshua was here. It was already destroyed 150 years before this. Therefore, are you ready for this conclusion? It should really cause some great concern as well. She concluded then that the Bible must not be historically accurate because the archaeological evidence suggests something different. Now, that really upset the world of biblical scholarship, because when we take a look at these walls again, first, the top one that I'm pointing to, the outer wall, the inner wall. Here's the aerial of the outer wall and the inner wall. But here on the right, I think is a very good image of what the wall looked like, especially the outer wall. Now, we may debate whether these houses and this wall was here at the time of Joshua, but there are other archaeologists who suggest that this wall does not date to the Middle Bronze period, but it dates to the Late Bronze period in the 1400s BC. Therefore, this was the wall. In fact, you see 2 sections of the wall: the stone wall that we still see today, but the mud brick wall that no longer is here. Every team of archaeologists, incidentally, found mud bricks, and it's the mud brick wall that fell outward and down, and that's the wall that came tumbling down as the Israelites circled the city. 7 times. It would have taken them maybe over an hour, I would think, to do that. But it's the mud brick wall that came tumbling down, and the wall indeed does date to the time of Joshua. So this is a good opening site to discuss, because really our whole view of how archaeology does not need to prove the Bible, but it confirms the historicity of the Bible. This is something that we need to analyze and really appreciate, because I think even if the mud brick or the stone wall that we see here and here does date to the Middle Bronze period, it very well could have still existed 150 years later, because it's the mud brick that fell outward and downward, even allowing the Israelites to conquer the city by bridging an entry point, if you will, into the city and taking it this way. So I think the evidence speaks for itself, and the biblical narrative is indeed true. Let's go to a second site, and now you see a good example of an archaeological tell. It began as a hill, so not all of this is archaeological ruins, but you can see much of it here exposed. The city wall right here. Here's the city gate. In fact, we'll fly over this site as well. With your permission, we'll take a look at this site from the air. In fact, I'll just fast forward it and alleviate the introduction here. But this is a great archaeological site. It's, by the way, located about 30 miles to the south and west of Jerusalem. And you can see how many times it's referenced in the Bible. We're going to talk about some of these in just a moment. But initially, this was a Canaanite city that was destroyed by Joshua in 2 days, according to Joshua 10. Later on, the king Rehoboam, according to 2 Chronicles 10, developed the city as to a very strong city with 2 walls, 2 gates. Here's the outer gate. Here's the inner gate. And it's quite an archaeological site today. In fact, even on top there, look at the left-hand corner, that's a palace that most likely was built at the time of Rehoboam. But look at this particular siege ramp. You can just see it just for a moment there. I'll be talking about it in just a minute because the Assyrian army in the end of the 8th century attacked the city and they took it. And then later on, the final destruction of the city came at the hands of the Babylonians. But look at how big the site is, well fortified, 2 walls, 2 gates, and it's located in what we call the Shvelah, or the lowlands of Judah. In fact, they just excavated a portion of this 10th century wall, and even a Canaanite temple that I'll show at the end of this section of talking about the site. So this is a good example of a biblical site. So let's just move on to a still picture, again, analyzing what we're seeing, the 2 walls. Disregard this new modern ramp. That's the way that we enter the site now. I'm sort of disappointed that they put it right in between the 2 walls. I think it distracts from the beauty of the archaeology myself, but they didn't ask me about this. But look at how big this palace actually was here at the top of the site. So what did the city look like? Now, images like this are helpful because as it became a very fortified city in the days of Rehoboam, you can see how many people lived inside. Now, most people did not live inside the fortified walls, but only came inside the walls when the city was being sieged. So if you were a resident coming into the fortified city, you would have walked through this outer gate and then through an inner gate. Now, on the left, we have at least partially reconstructed so that we can maybe determine what the gate looked like. It had 3 chambers, 1, 2, and 3, and of course 3 on the other corresponding side, with the entrance right here in the middle. But this gate, as we know, was used as many gates in the days of the Old Testament. Gates were places where the officials ruled. In fact, think of Ruth chapter 4, when Boaz wants to marry Ruth. Where do they meet to decide this? At the city gate. So the city gates were areas where people gathered to discuss, to talk about everything, the weather, the politics, probably. But archaeologically, this particular gate, they found a few interesting things. They found that this gate, later on in the days of the 8th century BC, was used as a cultic worship center. In fact, right here, they found evidence of an incense altar. This man is pointing to what, where was the horns of the altar, I should say. And this means that this gate was now being used for people to, unfortunately, worship God or even sacrifice to God in a place other than the Jerusalem temple. But guess what they found in the other part of the chamber here? Maybe you can guess what this stone is. And this is another picture of it. My guess is that we're all familiar with what a toilet is. This is an ancient toilet. In fact, one of 3 now that have been discovered. That's quite interesting because apparently there was a precedent already set in the days of Jehu, whereas they demolished the sacred stone of Baal and tore it down, the temple, and people have used it as a latrine to this day. Could it be that kings like Hezekiah came to the site and they actually brought an end to this cultic high place by putting a toilet there? What better way to defile a high place than to use it as a restroom? So this is quite interesting. Even further, in terms of excavation, they also found in the temple of Nineveh in Syria today, they found this particular prism. It's called the Sennacherib prism. In fact, this prism was found in the 1830s, and it dates to the time of this Assyrian king. Why I'm showing this to you is that here in cuneiform, this Assyrian king, pictured here in the middle, actually took the city of Lachish. In fact, he even, in great detail, as displayed in the British Museum, he even depicts how he took the city. In fact, he used the siege ramp. Remember, we saw the siege ramp earlier. And using the siege ramp, he had battering rams come up the siege ramp to attack and destroy the tower of the city. In fact, you can see the Judeans here on top with little bows and arrows. You can see women and children being deported from the gate. So this was a way for Sennacherib to indicate that while he could not take Jerusalem, he actually took this city. And it's actually mentioned in Isaiah chapter 36 and 37. Look at this big battering ram that was used here at the city of Lachish. Quite impressive. So yet that was when the Assyrians took the city in 701 BC. But apparently the city came back to life. And then 130 years later, it was finally destroyed one more time and for good. So let's now talk about the Babylonian taking of the city. Back here in 1935, this particular archaeologist named Starkey, I believe, found what is called ostraka. Now, this is an ostrakhan. It's a piece of pottery with writing on it. You can just see some of the what we call Paleo-Hebrew text. And here is someone at the Israel Museum carefully handling this particular piece. But we're interested in terms of what it says. So at the time that the Babylonians now, in 587 BC, apparently these 2 cities were communicating with each other. In fact, this inscription informs us of that. It says, and your servant is not sending him there anymore. And when morning comes around, may my Lord be apprised that we are watching for the fire signals of Lachish, according to all the signs which my Lord has given, because we cannot see Azekah. You can see how close the cities are. In fact, from the top of Lachish, you can see the top of Azekah. Now, why am I showing you this is because we read about the same thing in the book of Jeremiah. This is our interest, to see how archaeology blends together with the biblical text. So now Jeremiah, the prophet, writes this: when the king of Babylon's army fought against Jerusalem and all the cities of Judah that were left, against Lachish and Azekah, for only these fortified cities remained of the cities of Judah. So whereas we know that all the other cities, and eventually including Jerusalem, would be destroyed, these were the two last standing cities, and the archaeology really reveals the historicity of the biblical text in this case precisely. So I want us to again understand that relationship. Now, in the last couple seasons, they did find a Canaanite temple, and in this temple they found an altar, incense altars actually, and a big bronze cauldron. But most importantly, some smiting gods of the god that we know as Baal or Baal. So this rain and storm god of the Phoenicians and the Canaanites and the other people groups were actually found here in the temple as well. So this is a very interesting discovery as it relates to the Bible. Now, one more site before we go to the archaeological dig, and we'll do this rather quickly because Qumran, even though it's not the largest site, it's the most significant site because of the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found here. I think we're going to maybe skip around this drone video. With your permission, I'll just advance it just a little just to tell you that Jeremiah 32 mentions that there was a practice of hiding documents in clay jars. Here in this area of the Dead Sea, there you see the Dead Sea with the hills of Moab on the east side. Let me just advance to this particular image, because right there, I'm going to stop it just for a moment. Right there where you see the guy in white is where the first Dead Sea Scrolls were found in 1947. We call this Cave 1. I used to take my groups here, but here were two jars, clay jars with text found inside of them. In fact, now 12 caves have revealed up to about 930 fragments of Dead Sea Scroll texts here at this site called Qumran. Now, the significance of these texts, as we continue just to sort of skip around here in this video, there you see another cave. It's called Cave 4B, actually. Cave 10 is here. Cave 5 was here, I believe. Again, 12 caves have revealed some fragments of text. So Qumran now has texts of scripture that are the earliest ever found. They date from the 3rd century BC to the 1st century AD. So there's Cave 1, my picture. Here are the two jars where they found the text of many parchments. And this is a picture from 1952. So let me just give you an example of what the Dead Sea Scrolls look like. In fact, this is in Cave 4 inside, where about 65% of the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. But let's just take a look quickly at what these scrolls look like today. They're pretty much written on animal skin. Some are parchment. This is the 10 Commandments found in Cave 4. There's 20 portions of Genesis, 27 portions of Deuteronomy, 34 portions of the book of Psalms, 24 portions of Isaiah. So you can see how precise the Hebrew is. And why Qumran is the most significant site archaeologically is, again, these texts of scrolls and fragments of scrolls predate the earliest Hebrew text by at least 1,000 years. Here's a commentary on the book of Habakkuk. The temple scroll, actually found in Cave 11. This is the longest one. It's about 26 feet. In fact, they even found the Messiah scroll that talks about the Messiah in the 1st century as not only coming from the branch of David, but also from the line of Aaron, the priestly line, and as an interpreter. That sure sounds like our Jesus, does it not? Who came as prophet, priest, and king. Now, they also found what we call Psalm 151. We know that there's only 150 Psalms in our Bible, but this particular one was written apparently by David. And he talks about how small he was in relationship to his brothers. His hands had made him a flute and a lyre. And then eventually he was anointed by Samuel, but he sent and took me behind the sheep and anointed me with holy oil. It's a very humble representation of David's call as the king, who would, of course, succeed King Saul. And here is an example of the Isaiah scroll found in Cave 1 in 1947. In fact, this portion of Isaiah 61, we'll talk about this in our next session in April when we talk about the Hebraic background of Jesus. This is the section of scripture that Jesus read from in the synagogue at Nazareth, if you recall from Luke 4. So I've just boxed this section off. So when Jesus is handed the scroll of Isaiah, let me just say, not this particular scroll, but no doubt a scroll like this, this is what exactly Jesus read, Isaiah chapter 61, verses 1 and 2. So Qumran is indeed the most significant site in all of Israel. They found other things like bowls and lamps and sandals as well. But now let's just quickly go to how an archaeological dig works. And then we'll talk about, in our last 15 minutes, some other significant discoveries. So we wake up at dawn. We're at the site at dawn. We're collecting our tools, the turias, the wheelbarrows, the picks, the axes, the hand tools, and we're now cleaning out the site because of the winter growth in it. And then we raise the canopy for shade, and now we're ready to dig. I spent this time digging at the city gate here. In fact, this is the city gate of the site that was known to be the home of Goliath. In fact, if you want to see some speed digging, now really we don't dig this quickly, but time lapse really indicates how well we dig. We're collecting dirt into black buckets, and we're collecting pieces of pottery, and we're dumping the dirt in a pile. Look how small the pile is at this point. We're using hand tools. We're scraping a couple inches off every time, and then we're again dumping more dirt. So we found a lot of Philistine pottery. You can see it's colored like this with design. We call this bichrome ware, but when we clean it up, it looks very colorful. So the Philistines had a particular ceramic ware that was much more developed than the Israelite pottery. So we measure things, we record where we found significant things. And did I mention we're still dumping a lot of dirt? Look how big the pile is getting now. We're finding the bottoms of cups and bowls. In fact, we're taking away some walls to find out what's below. In fact, more speed digging just for the sake of getting you the sense of the difficulty and yet the excitement of how we dig, because you never know as we dig down what we're going to find. There's a top of a small juglet. Here's an oil lamp. And here's a stone, a basaltic stone used for grinding wheat, and another juglet. And of course, we're dumping dirt, and our pile is now getting bigger and bigger. So archaeology is not glamorous. However, we do have to take breaks for breakfast, and it's good to enjoy some watermelon and some cantaloupe. In the afternoon, by the way, we're scrubbing pottery. Every single piece of pottery is scrubbed, and then the experts are analyzing the pottery. So it's quite amazing, but we're also remembering that pottery is the main means of dating our structures that we find. And how much pottery do we find? Lots of it. This is just one day's worth of pottery. So pottery is the way that we date the structures. Now let's end with, in our last 10 minutes or so, maybe a little more than that, we're going to talk about significant archaeological discoveries, especially the one that was found in relationship to Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. Now, this is a very new discovery, but the dig at Mount Ebal of what is suggested to be the altar of Joshua goes back to the 90s. Adam Zertal is the one who excavated it, but through new means of discovery, a curse tablet was actually found. And this is what this curse tablet says. Cursed, 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 cursed by the God Yahweh, you will die. Cursed, cursed, you will surely die. Cursed by Yahweh, cursed, cursed, cursed. Remember, in the days of Joshua, these two mountains, one of them was the mountain of blessing and the other was the mountain of cursing. So here an ancient inscription has been deciphered just recently, and I bring and begin this this section of our presentation tonight with an updated discovery of this curse tablet, because again, it's mentioned in the Bible, not only Deuteronomy 27, but Joshua 8, and specifically about the altar that was built here by Joshua. So that's a significant new development. Let's go to Jerusalem. This is what Jerusalem looked like in the days of David. But in the days of Hezekiah, what did he do? Is he built a tunnel. Now, remember the king Sennacherib that we talked about at Lachish? He surrounded also the city of Jerusalem. In fact, we have it mentioned in 2 Kings 20, 2 Chronicles 32. So what Hezekiah did is he built a tunnel. It's 1,700 feet long. And he built it for the purpose of diverting water from the spring to a pool inside the city wall. In fact, cleared out about 100 years ago, we still, every tour that we lead, we still walk through the tunnel. In fact, I thought it would be interesting and fun for you to walk through the tunnel today. As we walk through this tunnel that still flows with water, you can see the water level is low. You can see the chisel marks. This, my friend, was a tunnel cut out 2,700 years ago by Hezekiah and his people in order to bring water into the city. Now, we know how the tunnel was cut because of this inscription. Of course, this is just a replica. It talks about two teams of rock cutters, one starting at the site of the spring and the other at the southern end until they actually met. In fact, this is how we interpret the inscription. Their picks, their crews towards each other, they were 3 cubits, which is about 1.5 meters away from each other. They heard each other's voices, and finally they broke through. You see, these two teams of rock cutters started at different, on opposite places, and they cut until they found each other in the middle. In fact, when we walk through it, you can actually see the meeting point where the opening was made, and the last 2 lines, the water flowed from the source to the pool, 1,200 cubits. This is mentioned in the Bible, and it's a remarkable discovery. And even Sennacherib, who said about Hezekiah, I shut him up like a bird in a cage. It was this Assyrian army that ended up being killed by God's intervention. Let's stay in Jerusalem and talk about what was found here just to the south of the Temple Mount. By the way, our last session in this 4-part series, and this will be in April, will be specifically Old and New Testament Jerusalem. I don't think you'll want to miss that session as well. But here in this place called the Ophel, they found 2 inscriptions, one with the name of Hezekiah and one with the name of Isaiah the prophet. This is the name Isaiah, and this is the word Navi. although the last word is missing, I should say, here on this small, it's called a bulla or bulla. It's a small piece of clay with an inscription on it. This was used to stamp a document, if you will. And this, by the way, is quite impressive, where we find names of biblical people, even another name called Nathan Melech, the servant of the king. He shows up in 2 Kings chapter 23. So when you are an archaeologist and you find an inscription with a biblical name on it, like they did in 1962 at Caesarea, this, by the way, was a city built by Herod the Great. There was a theater, there was a palace, there was a hippodrome, there was a harbor, there was even a freshwater swimming pool as a part of the palace. But what was found here in the area of the theater in 1962 was another inscription. And if you can read Latin, I'm pointing to the name Pilate, Pilatus, Pilatus in Latin. This is the same Pontius Pilate that condemned Jesus to crucifixion in Jerusalem. Even another inscription that was found at another Philistine site with the name Achish. Now, his name appears oftentimes in the Old Testament. So again, when we talk about the Philistines, they probably look something like this, but the name Achish has been discovered. Let's go to Gezer. This is another gate that was found early in the 70s and 80s, I believe, but a gate that was built by King Solomon. How do we know this? Is because 1 Kings chapter 9 tells us this. By the way, what did this gate look like? It was a gate that probably looked similar to this. You would enter the city through this gate, and again, 3 chambers on one side, 3 on the other, with soldiers positioned perhaps here. So this particular gate was built by Solomon because this is exactly what we read in 1 Kings 9. King Solomon had 3 administrative centers, one in Hatzor, one in Megiddo, and one here at Gezer. And incidentally, as you see the image here to the right, it very well could be that this is one of the father-in-laws of King Solomon, because they found his cartouche, at least a cartouche, I should say, and clarify it, here at Gezer. And it's believed that this was the pharaoh who indeed took Gezer, he set it on fire, and he gave it to his daughter, who happens to be Solomon's wife. So it could be that Solomon knew this guy himself personally. Let's go to the north and talk about another archaeological site called Tel Dan. Now, here at Tel Dan, they found the base of another huge sacrificial altar and the steps that led to the high place at Dan. Now, why is this significant? It's because we read that not only did the Danites in Judges chapter 18 set themselves up for false worship. In fact, this particular illustration maybe gives us a sense of what the altar and high place look like. But later on, King Jeroboam in 1 Kings chapter 12 establishes cultic practice here. In fact, they found these incense shovels here at Dan, I believe back in the 80s, I think, or early 90s. And that, again, is significant. So these incense altar shovels were actually used, as if I go back a couple slides again, as a part of this sacrificial system established and really, I should say, completed by Jeroboam, who was an evil northern kingdom king who established false worship here at Dan. But in 1993, they found the most important inscription, And this is the inscription as it appears in the Israel Museum. It's called the Dan inscription. And there where I'm pointing mentions the house of David. This is really the only extra biblical reference to the name of David outside the Bible. And it was found about right here outside of this, what we call an Iron Age 2 gate and wall system. Who was it written by? It could have been written by this guy. Now, this has been found up north at another site called Abel Beit Makkah, but it could be either Haziel, who was the author of this, by the way. It dates to the 9th century BC. He's sort of bragging about how he took the house of David. But it also could be Hadad or even Ahab, the Israelite king, who also was not too kosher himself. So isn't that an interesting discovery too? It was discovered, I think, in 2018. Let's go to another high place at Arad, and here I'm pointing to the high place that was used by the Judeans because they didn't want to go to Jerusalem 70 miles to the north. So they too, like Jeroboam did, they established a false worship center. Here's the sacrificial altar. Here's the court of the temple. Here's the Holy of Holy chamber. It probably looked like this. And as we saw initially at the start of this program, here's the Holy of Holies with two pillars and a standing stone called a mesabah. And again, this was brought down through the reforms of kings like Hezekiah, who brought an end to this cultic practice. In Jerusalem, they found an ossuary, which is a stone bones of a deceased person. The bones of most likely the high priest Caiaphas, the same high priest who bound Jesus from the Garden of Gethsemane. His bones were contained in this ossuary. However, in this particular more modest ossuary, the bones of a crucified man was found. And notice that the Roman nail did not go through the front part of the foot, but through the ankle area of the man's ankle and foot section. Here is the actual stone, the nail going through the ankle bone. And this may give us a good idea of how people were attached to the cross, including Jesus himself attached to the cross, perhaps nailed in this fashion because of the archaeological discovery that hints to this. Now, in 1986, up north, they found a boat, an ancient boat, and it looks like this. This is significant, my friends, because we know that the disciples were fishermen. And here we have a restored first century boat. And then as we bring this to an end, here at another site called Kirbet El Rai, it's a site in the lowlands. They found an inscription. Now, this inscription is quite interesting. It was found, I believe, in this silo. And it really is significant because the name. In fact, this is the team of archaeologists who discovered it. In fact, Dr. Kyle Keimer is the one who found the third and missing piece of this inscription. What is the name? You perhaps have heard about the name from Judges 6 and 7. It's the name of Gideon's alternative name. His alternative name was Jerubbaal. And here we have an inscription dating to about the same time as Gideon. And we know from the text that this was his name up there in the Jezreel Valley. So again, a significant inscription that was found. And we're going to end with this one before we open it up to a few questions. We'll end up with this particular inscription that was found in the repository of an Old Testament tomb. Now, in the repository was where all the person's belongings and bones were placed. In fact, this is a burial chamber called the Ketef Hinnom tomb. And you can see how large the repository was. But notice that here on this bench is where the bodies would be placed. This was a family tomb. And I'm illustrating it by yours truly. I'm playing the dead guy, if you will. And I'm laying down as if a dead body would be laid in this tomb. Now, I also had a group of people who were illustrating that this was a family tomb. So after their body would decay from the bones, their bones would be then placed in this repository. And what was found in this repository in 1979 were 1,000 items, including 263 intact vessels. Think of the significance of this discovery. But what was found here was the earliest name of God represented in archaeology on this silver amulet. It was found by Dr. Gabi Barkai and his team. And what does this silver amulet say? In Hebrew, Yereverka Danavishmareka, the Lord bless you and keep you. My friends, this dates from the 7th into the 6th century BC. It's 2,700 years old. And here in earlier form of Hebrew, the name of God is preserved. So I think that's quite impressive and important. So I'll conclude with these two quotes. Through the wealth of data uncovered by historical and archaeological research, we're able to measure the Bible's historical accuracy. In every case, the Bible is reliable. And also this quote, I know of no finding in archaeology that's properly confirmed, which is in opposition to the scriptures. The Bible is the most accurate history textbook the world has ever seen. So this brings us to an end of our presentation. And I guess I have still a few more moments to have some questions. If you have a question for me, and I'll be happy to entertain those questions.
Thank you very much once again, John. For those that are familiar with the way Zoom works, there's a little button down the bottom. You can raise your hand if you have a question, because I certainly, once again, John, found how you've managed to make the Bible a living word through the reference of archaeology. The other thing I do want to question you on is if archaeology neither proves or disproves the Bible, it's interesting that a passage comes to my mind, blessed are those who believe and have not seen. In other words, I think there's so much faith involved in this, but I think personally that the biblical archaeology probably, for me, add context to the Bible that I'm reading anyway. All right, anybody got some questions, please put your hand up or just feel free to unmute yourself and ask John a question. We don't have long, but we've got a few minutes, and I'd like everyone to maybe ask John a question if you've got a second or two. John, you've done it again.
Oh, hi, John.
There we go.
Hi there, Joyce.
Yeah. So the museum in Jerusalem would have a lot of these artifacts and explanations of them?
Yes. In fact, on every tour, I walk people through and we see the highlights of the Israel Museum, and they're all labeled. In fact, on my website, I think it's my resource page, I do have a good summary of some of the artifacts, some still pictures, if you will. And I also have on another video page link to 4 particular sessions that I do just about the artifacts that are seen in the Israel Museum. So this may be of interest to you if you want to look at artifacts and hear more precise explanations of that. It's a team effort that I did with Dr. Kyle Keimer, the same guy, by the way, who found the missing 3rd piece of the Gideon or the Jerubbaal inscription. So feel free to take a look at the resource page and you'll find those video links there too.
Thank you. And also, do you talk about the tunnels? I hear about there's tunnels in Jerusalem. I'm not sure, but yeah,
The Hezekiah's tunnel.
probably. Mm.
Yeah, this is a water tunnel that is discovered over 100 years ago, but it's a tunnel that's mentioned in the Bible. Hezekiah brought water into the city,
Mm.
and this is a great example of how we
My
can
apologies, John
use.
keeps dropping out, but
Yeah, we can use archaeology, and this is a good case where, you know, if the tunnel wasn't found, this would maybe be a reason to doubt the Bible, but
Mm.
it has been found. And I think archaeology is a tool that can be used apologetically, if you will, to assess and appreciate the Bible's accuracy.
Yeah, thank you, John. Very interesting.
You're welcome.
well, thank you once again, John. I don't see anybody else with their hand up or a question. I wonder, John, just a quick
There's Tamara. Yeah.
Tamara, sorry, go Tamara. Unmute yourself, Tamara.
Okay.
There we go.
Hi, John. Thanks for that. It's fascinating.
Thank you.
I guess I've always wondered about the dating of things. So when you said that the pottery is used to date a find, is it carbon dating, and how reliable is the dating mechanism?
Well, the pottery is the means of dating structures. Pottery, our carbon-14 is not used on pottery, but it is used occasionally on organic material that's found. In fact, I dug at a site where they found a part of a beam that was a part of the roof structure of a house, and it's very rare that you find wood or portions of wood, so that could be carbon dated. But pottery really is accurate up to about 50 years, give or take, either side of the date. And we know pottery is very reliable in terms of styles, models, pottery. You can pick up a piece of pottery and really determine its precise age. And then if it's found near the gate or a house structure, then you can date that structure based on what the pottery dates to itself. So it's quite accurate within about 50 years.
And is that because of the style of it? Is that you've got a particular style for a particular age?
Yeah, early bronze pottery is much different than Iron Age 2 pottery. So by knowing precisely the age of different styles of pottery, how it was formed, how long it was in the kiln, its model, if you will. We can basically date that precisely, and then everything else is based on the pottery. So it is quite accurate. Experts again can pick up a piece of pottery and go, "Oh, that's Iron Age 2. It's 950 BC," or late bronze from 1300. It's quite amazing how accurate it can be.
And what about the bones that you find?
Bones can be studied. In fact, DNA study can determine whose bone it was, an animal bone, a human bone. In fact, at Gezer, the 3 Canaanite skeletal remains were found. At Ashkelon, 200 Philistine skeletal remains were discovered by the University of Harvard. So a lot of analysis can be done of bones, determining how old the person was, and so forth. So bones also can be determined in terms of how old the person was or the animal was. Even the marking on the bone, in terms of how it was cut for a sacrifice, it even reveals the knife locations taken to the bone. So all of that is quite precise science.
So
okay. Tamara, go on, one more.
Just one more. So when you're dating the bones, do you date the bones by the pottery rather than the bones themselves?
I think it all depends on where you find the bones. If indeed the bones were found like at the Iron Age level of Gezer, you're most likely attributing that guy lived in the 12th century because that was destroyed then. So it all depends. But bones that were found in an ossuary, like in the ossuary of Caiaphas, DNA actually studied, and they determined that a 62-year-old man was buried, or his bones were placed there. So in that case, the ossuary was what dated the bones in terms of when the guy lived, and not the location, if that makes sense.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay,
Good questions. Thank you.
Tamara. John, thank you. What we're going to do is we're going to just quickly close in prayer. And if I could just get you to close in prayer for us, please, John, if you can. And I do want to make sure that everybody realizes that you're away for 2 weeks now, and we'll come back in early April. I think you're going in a dig, and that in itself sounds very exciting. John, I might have to join you, as you know, eventually, but I just want to make sure that everybody's aware, and then we'll give you some more information about some possible tours coming up. John, let's close in prayer and we'll call it a night. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lord, for your presence with us. Thank you for opening up our eyes and our hearts as we understand how archaeology is a very important tool in helping us appreciate the Bible's historicity. Your word is true in every detail, and I thank you that we can spend time tonight talking about the relationship between the ancient, the past, and our scriptures that we love so much. So go ahead of us, behind us, to our either side as we return to our homes, and until we meet again in April. Just bless these people in Australia and elsewhere who've joined us tonight. Thank you for how you do care for us in every way. So dismiss us with your peace and your presence. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, John. Can I say good night to everybody? And I appreciate everybody coming, and I'll be in touch with you as to the next lecture. And I've got a little surprise for you, but I'm going to leave it to the very last presentation. So good night to you all, and thank you for joining this webinar. Really nice to have you along. Bye-bye, and God bless.
Yep.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, John. That's great. Bye, everybody.
You're welcome.
Bye.